March 18, 1945, Oranienburg, Germany. The snow fell in thin sheets across the concrete apron at Oranienburg Airfield, 20 miles north of Berlin. Lieutenant Erwin Ziller stood beneath the wing of the aircraft, his breath visible in the pre-dawn cold. The machine above him bore no resemblance to anything he had flown before. No tail, no fuselage in the traditional sense, just a smooth, unbroken sweep of metal and wood that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. The Horten H229 V3 was the third prototype and the first intended for combat. Its twin Junkers Jumo 004B turbojet engines sat buried within the wing's thick center section, their intakes like hollow eyes staring forward. The entire airframe measured just over 16 meters from wingtip to wingtip. Its surface had been treated with a mixture of charcoal dust and wood glue, bonded to the plywood skin in an attempt to absorb radar waves. The brothers who designed it, Reimar and Walter Horten, called it the future. Others called it desperation. Ziller had been briefed 3 days earlier at the Reichsluftfahrt Ministerium in Berlin. The briefing officer, a Hauptmann with hollow eyes and a uniform that hung loose on his frame, had been blunt. Germany was losing the war. The Allies controlled the skies. Conventional fighters were being torn apart by American P-51 Mustangs and British Spitfires before they could even reach the bomber formations. Radar guided every intercept, every defense. The Reich needed something invisible. The H229 was that attempt. Fast enough to outrun most fighters, shaped to slip through radar nets, armed with 4 Mk-108 30mm cannons capable of shredding a B-17 in seconds. On paper, it was a miracle. In reality, it was an experiment strapped to 2 screaming turbines, and Ziller was the one who had to prove it could work. He climbed into the cockpit just after 0600 hours. The instruments glowed faintly in the dim light. No co-pilot, no navigator, just him, the stick, and the throttle. The canopy closed with a dull thud, sealing him inside. Outside, ground crew in grease-stained coveralls huddled against the cold, watching. They had seen too many prototypes fail. Too many pilots die testing machines that should have never left the drawing board. The Jumo engines ignited with a high-pitched whine that built into a roar. Ziller felt the vibration through the seat, through his bones. He eased the throttle forward. The aircraft began to roll, sluggish at first, then faster. The wings flexed slightly under the strain. At 180 kilometers per hour, he pulled back on the stick. The nose lifted. The ground fell away. For a moment, there was only the sound of the wind and the engines. Then the turbulence hit. The H229 bucked and twisted, the controls sluggish, unresponsive. Ziller fought to keep it level, sweat forming beneath his leather flight cap despite the cold. The aircraft climbed through 3,000 meters, then 4,000 meters. He leveled off and tried a shallow turn to the left. The response was delayed, mushy. He corrected, but the wing dipped further than expected. He keyed the radio. Oranienburg, this is Ziller. Handling characteristics are unstable, experiencing control lag in all axes. Static. Then a voice. Understood, Ziller. Continued test profile. Monitor engine temperatures. He glanced at the gauges. The starboard engine was running hot, the temperature needle edging toward the red line. Not critical yet, but close. He throttled back slightly and brought the aircraft into a wide circuit around the airfield. Below, the frozen landscape stretched out in shades of white and gray. Somewhere to the west, the Allies were advancing. Somewhere to the east, the Soviets were doing the same. And here he was, testing a weapon that might already be obsolete. Then the starboard engine began to surge. The roar became uneven, a stuttering cough. The temperature spiked. Ziller's hands moved instinctively, pulling the throttle back, trying to stabilize. but the engine was failing. He could feel it in the airframe, the loss of thrust, the sudden asymmetry. The aircraft yawed right, hard. He stomped the rudder pedal, but the H-229 had no vertical stabilizer, no tail to correct the spin. The ground tilted, the horizon spun. Ziller hauled back on the stick, trying to regain control, but the wing dropped into a spiral. The altimeter unwound, 3,000 meters, 2,500 meters, 2,000 meters. His vision narrowed. The airfield appeared below, small and distant. He thought about ejecting, but the H-229 had no ejection seat. He thought about his wife in Dresden, his daughter who had not seen him in 6 months. At 800 meters, the engine exploded. Fire erupted from the starboard wing root, bright orange against the gray sky. The aircraft flipped inverted. Ziller's world became a chaos of noise and flame and falling. He fought the controls until the very end, until the earth rose up to meet him and there was nothing left but impact. The wreckage burned for 20 minutes before the ground crew reached it. They found Ziller's body still strapped into the cockpit, his hands frozen on the stick. The H-229 V3 was destroyed. Twisted metal and charred wood scattered across a snow-covered field. The program was not canceled. 2 days later, engineers began salvaging what they could from the wreck. And in a hangar 50 kilometers away, another prototype sat waiting, unfinished, as the sound of Soviet artillery grew louder in the east. April 14, 1945, Friedrichroda, Thuringia, Germany. The convoy left Oranienburg under cover of darkness. 6 trucks, their canvas covers pulled tight, engines straining under the weight of crated machinery and incomplete airframes. Oberleutnant Klaus Weber sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, an Opel Blitz that smelled of oil and diesel. His orders were simple: evacuate the remaining Horten prototypes and research materials to Friedrichroda, a small town in the Thuringian forest, before the Soviets overran the facility. The roads were clogged with refugees. Families pushed carts loaded with belongings, their faces hollow with exhaustion. Soldiers from shattered units wandered without orders, their uniforms filthy, their weapons discarded. The Reich was collapsing, and everyone knew it. Weber had stopped believing in victory weeks ago. Now he only believed in survival. They reached Friedrichroda 3 days later, on April 14th. The facility was a converted mining complex, its entrance hidden beneath a canopy of trees. Inside, engineers and technicians had been working around the clock to complete the Ho 229 V4 and V5 prototypes. The V4 was nearly finished, its airframe assembled, engines installed. The V5 was little more than a skeleton, wooden ribs exposed like the bones of some prehistoric creature. Weber found the lead engineer, Herr Dr. Friedrich Kessler, in the main assembly hall. Kessler was in his 50s, bald, with wire-rimmed glasses, and the hunched posture of a man who had spent too many years bent over blueprints. He did not look up when Weber approached. "We cannot finish them," Kessler said quietly. "Not in time." "How long do you need?" Weber asked. "Weeks, months, perhaps. The V4 needs engine tuning, control system calibration, flight tests. The V5 is not even close." Weber glanced around the hall. A dozen workers moved among the aircraft, their movements slow, mechanical. They looked like ghosts. "We do not have weeks, Herr Doctor. The Americans are 40 kilometers west, the Soviets are 60 kilometers east. In 3 days, maybe 4, this place will be overrun." Kessler finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "Then what do you propose?" "We destroy what we cannot move. We bury the rest." Kessler's face went pale. "Destroy it? This is the most advanced aircraft in the world. Years of research, of innovation." "Will mean nothing if it falls into enemy hands," Weber interrupted. "Those are my orders, from Goering himself." Kessler said nothing. He turned back to the V4, running a hand along its smooth wing surface. The charcoal-infused coating felt rough, almost organic. "They will never understand it," he said softly. "Even if they find it, they will not know what they have." Over the next 2 days, the facility became a hive of frantic activity. Engineers dismantled the V5, creating its components and hiding them in a nearby salt mine. The V4 was moved into a reinforced storage bunker, covered with tarps and camouflage netting. Documents were burned by the boxful, the smoke rising in thick columns above the trees. Weber watched it all with a sense of profound waste. So much effort, so much brilliance, reduced to ash and secrecy. On the evening of April 16th, the first American reconnaissance aircraft appeared overhead. A P-38 Lightning, its twin booms unmistakable against the twilight sky. It circled twice, then disappeared to the west. Weber knew what would come next. Bombers, infantry, tanks. The end. He gathered the remaining staff in the assembly hall. 23 men, exhausted, frightened. "You have a choice," he told them. "Stay and be captured, or leave now and try to reach your families. The Americans will be here by morning." Most chose to leave. A few stayed, too tired or too loyal to abandon their work. Kessler stayed. He sat beside the V4, his back against the landing gear, staring at nothing. Weber approached him one last time. "Come with us, Herr Doctor." Kessler shook his head. "I built this. I will not leave it." Weber wanted to argue, but he saw the resignation in the man's eyes. He nodded once, and then turned and walked out. The convoy departed just after midnight, 3 trucks now instead of 6, carrying what little they could salvage. Behind them, the facility was silent, dark, waiting. The Americans arrived at dawn on April 17th. Elements of the 3rd Armored Division supported by infantry from the 1st Infantry Division. They encountered no resistance. The facility was deserted, its personnel gone, its secrets buried. But the soldiers were thorough. They searched every building, every tunnel, and in the reinforced bunker, beneath layers of camouflage, they found it. The Horten Ho 229 V4 sat in the dim light with its wings spanning the width of the chamber. The American soldiers stared at it in silence. One of them, a corporal from Ohio, walked up and touched the wing. "What the hell is this?" he asked. No one answered. They did not know. But they knew it was important. Within hours, orders came down from division headquarters. Secure the site, photograph everything, prepare the aircraft for transport. By evening, engineers from the Army Air Force's Technical Intelligence Unit had arrived, along with a full security detachment. The Ho 229 was created and loaded onto a flatbed truck. Its destination, a ship bound for the United States. Kessler watched from the trees, hidden among the shadows. He had not left after all. He had waited, hoping perhaps that the Americans would destroy it, that his life's work would not become a trophy. But they were taking it to study, to copy, to understand. He felt a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. The Ho 229 would survive the war, but Germany would not.
September 3, 1945, Freeman Field, Indiana, United States. The Horten Ho 229 arrived at Freeman Field on a humid afternoon in early September. The war in Europe had been over for 4 months. Japan had surrendered just days earlier. The world was exhaling, trying to understand what had just happened, what had been lost, what had been won. But in a hangar at Freeman Field, the future was being unpacked. Captain Robert Shaw stood on the concrete floor, watching as workers carefully removed the aircraft from its crate. Shaw was a test pilot, 28 years old, with a degree in aeronautical engineering from MIT and over 2,000 hours in everything from P-51s to captured German jets. He had been assigned to the Foreign Technology Division, tasked with evaluating enemy aircraft. He had flown Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, even a Heinkel 162 that nearly killed him, but he had never seen anything like this. The Ho 229 emerged piece by piece, like some ancient relic being excavated. The wings were intact, their surface scarred but unbroken. The engines had been removed for separate analysis. The cockpit was surprisingly small, cramped, the instruments labeled in German. Shaw climbed inside, settling into the seat where Erwin Ziller had sat 6 months earlier. He ran his hands over the controls, imagining what it must have been like to fly this thing, to ride the edge of control in a machine that barely understood the laws of aerodynamics. "What do you think, Captain?" The voice belonged to Colonel Thomas Hayes, Shaw's commanding officer, a veteran of the bomber campaigns over Europe. Shaw climbed out, wiping dust from his hands. "It's radical, sir. No tail, no vertical stabilizers. All the control surfaces are in the wing. Flying this would be like nothing else." Hayes nodded. "The engineers say the shape makes it nearly invisible to radar. Is that possible?" "Theoretically, yes. If the surface absorbs radar energy instead of reflecting it, and if the shape deflects what little does bounce back, you could slip right through a radar net. But it would take incredible precision to build, and the handling would be a nightmare." "Can you fly it?" Shaw looked at the aircraft, at its sleek, predatory form. "I don't know, sir. Maybe. If we can get the engines working, if we can figure out the control system, but it's a risk. This thing killed its test pilot." "Everything killed test pilots back then," Hayes said dryly. "The question is whether it's worth understanding." Over the next 3 months, a team of engineers and technicians worked to restore the Ho 229 to flight-worthy condition. The Jumo engines were overhauled, new fuel lines installed, the control system tested and retested. Documents captured from the Friedrich Rota facility provided some guidance, but much had been lost or destroyed. They were working blind, reverse engineering a machine that was a decade ahead of its time. Shaw spent hours in the cockpit, memorizing the layout, practicing procedures. He read Ziller's flight reports, recovered from German archives, and studied the accident analysis. The starboard engine had failed due to overheating, likely caused by insufficient cooling airflow. The control lag had been due to the unconventional aerodynamics, the lack of a traditional tail. Every lesson was written in blood. On December 12, 1945, the Ho 229 was rolled out onto the runway at Freeman Field. The sky was overcast, the temperature just above freezing. Shaw sat in the cockpit, his hands on the controls, his heart pounding. Hayes stood beside the runway, along with a dozen engineers and military officials. No one spoke. They just watched. Shaw ran through the checklist one last time, then fired up the engines. The Jumo turbines screamed to life, their sound alien and harsh. He felt the vibration, the raw power. He released the brakes and began to roll. The aircraft accelerated smoothly, faster than he expected. At 180 kilometers per hour, he pulled back on the stick. The nose lifted. The ground dropped away. For the first few seconds, everything was fine. The Horten Ho 229 climbed steadily, its wings cutting through the cold air. Then he felt it, the same sluggish response Ziller had reported, the delay between input and reaction. He eased into a shallow turn, testing the limits. The aircraft responded, but slowly, reluctantly. He could feel the edge, the point where control would slip away. He climbed to 3,000 meters and leveled off. The engines were running smoothly, the temperature stable. He tried a series of maneuvers, rolls, dives, tight turns. Each time the aircraft obeyed, but with a strange, unsettling lag. It was like flying through water, like the air itself was resisting. He understood now why Ziller had died. This was not a machine you flew. It was a machine that tolerated your presence. After 20 minutes, Shaw brought the Ho 229 back to Freeman Field and landed without incident. As he climbed out, Hayes approached, his expression unreadable. "Well?" Hayes asked. Shaw pulled off his helmet, his face pale. "It flies, sir, but it's dangerous.
The handling is unpredictable. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and you're dead. As a weapons platform, it might have worked. As a fighter, I'm not sure any pilot could have mastered it in time. Hayes nodded slowly. The war is over, Captain. This thing is just a curiosity now. But Shaw knew better. The Ho-229 was not a curiosity. It was a warning, a glimpse of what was coming. Jets that flew faster than sound, shapes that bent light and radar, weapons that could strike without being seen. The Germans had been ahead, but they had run out of time. Others would not. The Horten Ho-229 was eventually transferred to the Smithsonian Institution, where it was stored and studied for decades. In 2009, it was put on display at the National Air and Space Museum's Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center, a silent testament to innovation born from desperation. Visitors walked around it, marveling at its design, unaware of the men who had died bringing it to life, the engineers who had sacrificed everything to build it, the pilots who had fought to control it. Robert Shaw returned to test flying after the war, eventually transitioning to the new generation of American jet fighters. He never forgot the Ho-229, the way it felt in the air, the strange, unsettling sense that he was flying something that did not want to be flown. He retired in 1967, and when reporters asked him about the most dangerous aircraft he had ever tested, he always gave the same answer: the Horten, because it was perfect, and perfection in war is terrifying.